The stars beyond the observation deck shimmered like scattered gemstones, cold and distant. High Marshal K.L. Thorne stood with his arms behind his back aboard the Aegis Crown, the command vessel of the United Planetary Concord. His silver-blue uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Outer Fleet, polished to gleaming perfection for today's diplomatic reception. Beside him stood his chief of staff, Captain Rika Solon, her slate-gray eyes skimming the data slate she always carried like an extension of her hand. "They're arriving ahead of schedule," she murmured. Kale exhaled sharply through his nose. "Of course they are. Elendari never miss a chance to assert superiority. A power play." The Elendari were known for their precision and pride, an elegant species with bioluminescent skin and six-fingered hands revered for their scientific mastery and cultural stoicism. Since first contact 12 years ago, they treated humanity with an aloof tolerance, viewing Terrans as aggressive upstarts too brash for civilized diplomacy. This summit, held aboard the Aegis Crown, was meant to solidify a science-sharing agreement and perhaps finally open the gates to true alliance. But Kale had already received murmurs from Concord intelligence the Elendari were planning something unorthodox. When the sleek silhouette of the Elendari cruiser, Sapphire Thread, appeared outside the viewport, Kyle's jaw tensed. Unlike the rugged modular human ships, the Elendari vessel was a thing of art, curved like a shell hull, glowing faintly with flowing streams of biolight. "Docking bay ready," Kale asked. "All preparations confirmed," Rika replied. As they descended to the docking chamber, Kale adjusted the silver sash draped over his shoulder. He hated ceremony, but today he would play the diplomat with all the polish he could muster. The chamber was pristine. An honor guard of Terran officers stood in full ceremonial dress, arrayed in perfect formation. When the docking clamps engaged and the pressurized airlock began to cycle, all fell silent. The outer seal released with a hiss, and the Elendari delegation stepped onto human metal. 3 Elendari emerged first, tall and slender, in robes that shimmered with shifting hues, amber, teal, violet, depending on how the light struck them. Their leader, a female with braided iridescent hair and skin that glowed soft lavender, stepped forward. "High Marshal Kale Thorne," she said in perfect Terran standard, her accent lilting like music. "I am First Counselor Seralis of the Elendari High Conclave. We greet you in the spirit of mutual progress." Kyle inclined his head. "Welcome to the Aegis Crown Counselor. May this be a step toward true understanding between our peoples." Seralis's lips curved slightly. "Indeed, and as a sign of that intent, we bring a gift and a living symbol of our willingness to connect." She gestured, and from the docking tunnel stepped a fourth figure. Kyle's heart skipped. It was a woman, or what passed as one, among the Elendari. Her form was humanoid, but there the similarities faded. Her skin was a cascade of pale golden light, her eyes twin pools of swirling color that seemed to shift with her breath. Silver vines were braided into her hair, and a delicate shawl of crystalline threads fluttered over a gown that shimmered like starlight on water. This Seralis announced with pride, barely hidden beneath the formality, is Marin of the Selenari caste, daughter of the High Luminary. She has volunteered to serve as your bondmate and cultural envoy. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Kale's spine straightened. He masked his reaction, but inside his mind reeled. A bondmate. This was no simple envoy. Among the Elendari, such unions, even ceremonial, were symbolic of spiritual binding, often invoked in times of war or conquest. And the Elendari believed that cross-species reproduction with humans was not only impossible, but distasteful. This wasn't a gesture of unity. It was a joke, a trap, a ploy to undermine his standing and make Terrans appear gullible or desperate. But as Marin stepped forward, he saw something flicker behind those swirling eyes, a faint glimmer of uncertainty or resistance. "Marshal Thorne," she said, her voice a soft chime. "It is my honor to serve as your bridge to the Elendari." Kale stepped forward. His voice was calm, measured. "The honor is mine, Marin of the Selenari. The United Planetary Concord accepts you as our guest." He took her hand gently as if touching glass. Her fingers were cool, almost imperceptibly trembling. Counselor Seralis's lips pursed in disappointment. She had expected outrage, or at least a refusal. Instead, Kale had taken their joke and made it diplomacy. "Captain Solon," Kyle said, turning smoothly. Please escort the Elendari delegation to their quarters. I will personally see to Marin's comfort. As they walked the corridors of the Aegis Crown, the ship's crew stared in hushed curiosity. Some stared openly at Marin's luminous presence. Others avoided her gaze. Kyle walked beside her in silence until they reached the ambassadorial suite, a chamber fitted with variable environmental controls and a panoramic star view. He opened the door for her. Not quite Elendari standards, I imagine. It is more than sufficient, she replied, stepping inside. He followed, keeping a respectful distance. I apologize for this situation. I assume it was not your decision. To his surprise, Marin turned and looked him in the eye. Most Elendari avoided direct gaze, considering it crude. You assume wrongly, Marshal, she said softly. The conclave did not force me. I volunteered. Kale's brow furrowed. Why? She moved to the window, her silhouette bathed in starlight. Your people fascinate me. So quick to adapt, so relentless. The High Conclave sees you as unpredictable. I see potential. So this isn't a prank to you. Oh, it is, she admitted, glancing back with a slight smile. They believe this union will amuse the Conclave for years, but I see an opportunity buried beneath their mockery. Kyle stepped forward slowly. You're here to study us. To understand, she corrected. To challenge assumptions, even our own, he chuckled. Then you'll fit in perfectly with humans. We're built on challenging assumptions. Their eyes met again, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that went beyond diplomacy. Marin touched the edge of the desk, fingers tracing its clean lines. And what about you, Marshal? Are you merely playing along to preserve your reputation? I'm used to being underestimated, Kale said. Let's give them a reason to regret it. 3 days into Marin's residency aboard the Aegis Crown, diplomatic formalities had resumed their rhythm. The science-sharing agreement, which once dominated the attention of both delegations, now seemed like a convenient pretext for watching the evolving dynamic between the High Marshal and his unexpected Elendari bride. Marin adjusted to her quarters swiftly, perhaps too swiftly, Kale thought. She spent most of her days observing ship operations, attending joint briefings, and asking questions that would seem benign to the casual ear, but revealed a sharp mind honed by careful study. Cal found her difficult to ignore. He was in the command center when Captain Solon approached with her signature crisp efficiency. Marshal, we've received a request from Marin. She wishes to shadow the crew during an engineering systems review. Kale raised an eyebrow. Did Donovan approve that Lieutenant Donovan is flattered? He thinks she's curious, not spying. She's Elendari. She's always doing both. Solon didn't argue. She knew better. Should I deny the request? Kale shook his head. No, but assign Lieutenant Reese to keep an eye on her. Quietly. The day proceeded without incident. Reports trickled in. Marin shadowed the engineers, asked insightful questions, and even shared technical insights that surprised their specialists. Lieutenant Donovan, the ship's chief engineer, described her as damn brilliant for someone who thinks in song metaphors. But something gnawed at Kyle. Late that evening, as silence fell over the command deck, he found himself outside Marin's quarters. He hesitated at the door before announcing himself. Enter, came her melodic voice. Inside the suite was dim-lit only by the slow pulse of bioluminescent panels she had imported from the sapphire thread. The room smelled faintly of warm mineral spice, a common Elendari atmospheric scent. She stood by the viewport wrapped in a flowing tunic of midnight blue, her hair down and shimmering. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Cal said. Only my solitude, she replied with a faint smile. You seem restless, Marshal. He stepped inside. I'm not used to guests who know exactly how to weaponize charm. Marin arched an eyebrow. Am I weaponizing it? You're a Elendari. If you weren't, I'd be more worried. That earned a soft laugh. Fair. He moved closer. You've integrated faster than most diplomats I've seen. Are you always this efficient, or are you in a hurry for something? I was raised in the high archives, she said. My education included over 3,000 hours of simulated diplomacy and conflict scenarios. It's difficult for me to not analyze. Cal regarded her with a steady gaze. And what's your analysis so far? Of us, of me. Marin turned from the stars, her expression unreadable. You are Composed, calculated, but not cold. And despite what the conclave thinks, I believe you feel more than you show. And that scares them. She nodded. Your people are dangerous to them because you adapt, because you don't accept limits as fixed. There was a long silence. Cal took a step closer until only a breath separated them. Are you afraid of us? Marin's voice was barely a whisper. No, I'm afraid of what I might learn if I stop pretending not to be fascinated. The air between them thickened. He studied her, the otherness of her features, and yet the sharp, familiar curiosity in her eyes. The moment threatened to spill into something electric, but then her expression shifted. You're being watched, Marshal, she said softly, eyes darting toward the environmental panel in the corner. I detected subtle interference during my diagnostics earlier. The Elendari delegation has embedded passive recorders in multiple suites, including mine. Kyle's demeanor changed instantly. Are you certain I deactivated them temporarily? But if they're using adaptive sensors, they'll recalibrate soon. We have minutes. Kyle tapped his wrist communicator. Rika, code signal gray. Quiet sweep. Engineering priority on signal variants. Understood, Solon replied without hesitation. When he looked back at Marin, she was already disengaging a small silver module from the underside of her desk. The display flickered briefly before stabilizing. They've logged over 80 hours of ambient audio and biometric data. That includes your visit 2 nights ago. Kel clenched his jaw. They're trying to catch us violating diplomatic boundaries. Discredit the alliance before it even begins. And perhaps sabotage my own credibility, Marin added. A bride who forgets her duty and falls for a human scandalous. He frowned. They'll weaponize any moment of closeness. That's why I must remain cautious, she said. Kyle's expression darkened. They won't use you like that. For a moment, silence returned. Then she held out the small module. I can loop the recordings with non-revealing data, ambient ship noise, recycled conversations. Do it. As she worked, Kale sat down across from her. Why warn me, Marin? Why betray them? I'm not betraying them, she said without looking up. I'm protecting my research, my dignity. And she paused, then looked up, eyes glimmering. Maybe something else I haven't yet named. Kale swallowed the rush of emotion her words triggered. You came here under the guise of a farce, but you're not laughing. She shook her head. Not anymore. A soft chime sounded on his wristband. Marshal, it's Solon. Multiple signal leaks confirmed. Engineering teams are rerouting detection nodes. You were right. Kale nodded. Maintain sweep. Do not engage. Let them believe we're unaware. Understood. When he looked back, Marin was watching him closely. They'll keep escalating, she said. They think they're playing a clever game. Then let's play better. She smiled, but it was laced with uncertainty. And when they find out this farce may have consequences, he met her gaze with unflinching steadiness. Then we show them what real diplomacy looks like. The hum of the Aegis Crown's engines was a constant companion in the ship's lower decks, steady, almost meditative. It was in this rhythm that Marin now walked beside Dr. Alea Voss, the ship's chief medical officer, through the biolab situated just off the primary infirmary. Despite her refined appearance and Elendari grace, Marin moved with curiosity and focus. She leaned over sample tubes, inspected Terran DNA replication chambers, and asked questions sharp enough to make even Dr. Voss blink in surprise. You're not just an envoy, the doctor finally said, folding her arms. You're trained. I am, Marin replied easily. I specialize in comparative xenobiology. Before this posting, I worked in the celestial adaptation labs on Elender Prime. We studied genetic elasticity in post-terraform species. Dr. Voss raised a brow. So this whole envoy bride thing, a cover, Marin admitted, a convenient joke for the conclave. But I requested the assignment for research, for access. To us, Marin gave a faint smile. To humans. Dr. Voss studied her carefully. You're remarkably candid. I've learned that some humans respond better to directness. You, for example. The doctor gave a soft snort of amusement. Fair. So what is it you're really after, Marin of the Selenari? Marin's eyes glittered like liquid gold. I believe your species holds the key to understanding the next phase of adaptive evolution, perhaps even beyond biological compatibility as we understand it. Voss didn't laugh. She was too experienced to dismiss such bold claims. Instead, she gestured to the medical scanner. Well, if you're going to be poking around in here, let's at least get baseline readings. For security clearance. Of course, Marin said, slipping onto the examination platform. She lay still as the scanner passed over her. Dr. Voss frowned. Marin's eyes narrowed. Is something wrong? The doctor's brow creased. Your biochemistry is shifting. Marin sat up too quickly. Shifting how your cellular activity is elevated. Protein synthesis is accelerating. There's mild hormonal fluctuation. It's not a Lindari baseline, but also not human. Marin's face paled, the light beneath her skin dimming slightly. How recent? Difficult to say. Maybe a few days. But something triggered it. Dr. Voss's eyes sharpened. You haven't had any close physical contact with Terran personnel, have you? Marin's silence was answer enough. The doctor nodded slowly. We may need to run a more extensive panel. Not yet, Marin said, slipping off the bed. Her voice was calm but urgent. I need time. Please don't mention this to the marshal. Marin, please, doctor. I'm not in danger. I need a few days to confirm a theory. Dr. Voss didn't like it, but she saw something in the Elendari's eyes that halted her protest. Fear, yes, but also wonder. 3 days, Voss said finally. Then I'll run a full sequence with or without your permission? Marin nodded. Agreed. Elsewhere on the ship, Cale Thorne stood in the communications alcove of his private office. A secure line crackled to life on the display, revealing the angular face of Admiral Quinn Davros, head of Concord Diplomatic Command. Marshal Thorne, the Admiral, said without preamble, Word from intelligence confirms your suspicions. The Elendari delegation transmitted unauthorized telemetry 3 times in the last 48 hours. Cale's jaw tightened. I assume the recordings were scrambled. They were, but only partially. Whatever they captured, they're reviewing it back on Elendar Prime. We've issued a formal protest. They denied everything. Cal ran a hand through his short hair. Of course they did. You want us to extract the envoy, Davros asked. Cut this before it spirals. Cal hesitated. His thoughts went to Marin, the defiant intelligence behind her eyes, her confession about her real purpose, and that moment of stillness when she admitted curiosity rather than contempt. No, he said finally. We stay the course. Davros raised an eyebrow. This started as a prank, Cale, a distraction. Now it's on the edge of becoming a diplomatic crisis. Cale leaned in. If this prank proves anything more, we'll need to control the fallout. But first we need facts. I'll keep her close. Davros studied him. Is that a tactical decision or a personal one? Cale didn't answer. That night, Marin awoke abruptly. The ship's dim light simulated dusk, casting her quarters in violet blue shadow. Her pulse thudded unnaturally in her ears. Her skin shimmered too brightly under the glow. Something inside her had shifted again. Slipping from bed, she retrieved her personal bioscanner from a concealed compartment in her desk. The small device whirred softly as it analyzed her blood. The display pulsed red. Her body was incorporating non-native proteins, Terran proteins. The hormonal markers were impossible. No Elendari had ever recorded changes like this outside of controlled mutation experiments. And yet the data was clear. She was adapting to Cale. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled. Impossible. And yet, she stood before the mirror watching the subtle shift in the tone of her skin, the way her eyes reflected not just Elendari light, but now faint hues of Terran chromatic frequencies. What am I becoming? The knock came gently but firmly. She turned toward the door. Enter. Kyle stepped in casual, for once jacket undone over his uniform. You weren't at the diplomatic briefing. I wasn't feeling well. He frowned. Are you ill? Marin met his gaze, and in that moment she made a decision. No, she said. But I am changing. Cale moved closer. What does that mean? She reached into the shadows and retrieved the scanner. I need you to see this. He read the data silently. When he looked back at her, there was no fear, only concern. This isn't just biological, he said. It's something more. I didn't think it was possible, Marin whispered. But my body doesn't lie. It's responding to your presence, your DNA. Integrating. Cal placed the scanner down gently. Do you think it's permanent? I don't know. I need more time. I need to run tests and not just alone. Cal nodded. Then we tell Voss. We keep this quiet until we know what we're dealing with. Marin hesitated. There's one more thing. He tilted his head. If this continues, it may affect reproductive systems. The Conclave believes cross-species conception is impossible, but I'm not so sure anymore. Cal's breath left him. You think? I don't know, she said again. But if I'm right, we're not just making history, we're rewriting it. Silence stretched between them. Then Cal reached out and took her hand. Then let's write it together. The ship's night cycle bathed the Aegis crown in a gentle ultramarine hue. Most of the crew had retired. Only the night watch remained on duty, their movements purposeful and quiet. Cal Thorne stood in his private office, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the projection before him. A 3D rendering of Marin's bioscan rotated slowly in the air, courtesy of Dr. Voss, who now stood beside him. Her voice was unusually subdued. This is a cellular reconfiguration, Marshal, not an immune response. Her body is welcoming the Terran DNA. Cal gave her a sideways glance. You're saying this is voluntary? Voss shook her head. I'm saying it's intelligent. Elendari biology has always been known for adaptability, but this level of specificity, it's unprecedented. Her system isn't just tolerating your biochemistry, it's restructuring itself around it. He turned back to the hologram. What does it mean for her health? Too soon to tell. So far, her vitals are stable. Stronger even. No sign of rejection or cellular degradation. Voss hesitated. But if it continues, it might extend to reproductive compatibility. I've already seen preliminary shifts in her endocrine system. Kyle rubbed his jaw muscles tight. This was supposed to be a political game. It still is, Voss replied. But someone forgot to tell biology. He looked at her. Does anyone else know? Only Lieutenant Reese. I needed a second opinion on the biosample tagging. He's trustworthy, Cal considered. Keep it that way, for now. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, Counselor Alareth Seralis reviewed her own reports in the Elendari delegation quarters. Her face, always serene in public, was now a mask of barely contained tension. The passive recording devices had picked up something brief spikes in Marin's biometrics, along with trace emotional residue recorded through the suite's environmental sweeps. Data the Elendari considered sacred in their culture was being used here as political leverage. She is forming a bond, murmured the younger diplomat Vera, with the human, deeper than intended. Seralis didn't respond immediately. She tapped a crystalline stylus against her datapad. We underestimated her curiosity, Seralis said, or overestimated her loyalty. Vera's tone darkened. Shall I recommend recall? No, Seralis said. Not yet. A premature recall would raise Terran suspicion. We need evidence. If Marin has compromised her objectivity, the Conclave must see proof. And if she's pregnant, Vera's voice carried a trace of disbelief. Then she has become both liability and opportunity. Back in Cal's quarters, Marin sat curled near the viewport, wrapped in a loose iridescent shawl. The galaxy outside shimmered with impossible colors, nebulae like ink swirling in water. Her mind raced even as her body remained unnaturally still, an Elendari trait she'd often taken for granted, now shattered by unfamiliar warmth in her core. The door opened with a soft chime, and Cal entered, 2 mugs in hand. Decaf coffee, he offered. I had Voss make sure it wouldn't melt Elendari organs. She chuckled, accepting it. You're quite considerate for a military officer. I'm adaptable, he said, settling beside her. They sipped in silence for a moment. I saw the full bioscan, he said eventually. Voss thinks this isn't a mutation. She thinks it's designed. Marin nodded slowly. I suspected as much. Elendari adaptability evolved for planetary survival, but perhaps it was always meant for more than that. Kyle looked at her. Your people don't see it that way. They fear change, she said. We've spent centuries perfecting control of biology, emotion, politics. But perfection has become stagnation. She turned toward him. You, Cal Thorne, represent chaos to them, evolution unchecked. And me? He tilted his head. What do you represent? A choice, she said quietly. One I'm not sure I'm brave enough to make. He set his mug down. You already made it when you stepped off their ship. The room fell into a quiet tension. Kale's gaze lingered on her features. Her eyes, always in flux, now shimmered with something warmer, something achingly human. Then came the knock. Commander, came Rika Solin's voice muffled through the door. You'll want to see this. We have a situation. In the command center, Kale, Marin, Solon, and Voss reviewed a data stream from engineering. Donovan, gruff, red-haired, and perpetually smudged with grease, stood with arms folded across his broad chest. Found him during a routine rerouting of Marin's environmental panel, Donovan said. Biochemical sensors. Passive but sophisticated. Tuned to pick up hormonal shifts. Not ours, theirs. Cal stared at the feed. The Ilindari were monitoring her health remotely. Yep, Donovan confirmed. And it's worse. These aren't for just observation. They were scanning for one specific marker. What kind? Voss asked. Donovan tapped a few keys, pulling up a genetic sequence. Voss's eyes narrowed. That's a prenatal development marker. Marin's voice was a whisper. They were watching for pregnancy. Kale's knuckles whitened. They suspect. Or they know, Solon said. And now they're biding their time. What do we do? Donovan asked. Yank the tech stage a confrontation? Cal shook his head. No. We do nothing yet. Let them think they're in control. Voss looked to Marin. How do you want to proceed? Marin stood tall. I want to finish what I came here to do. My research. My decision. On my terms. Kyle nodded. Then we hold the line. The next morning, Marin stood before the assembled diplomatic team, both Terran and Elendari, in the central atrium of the ship. The event was a scheduled tour, with Counselor Seralis expected to speak, but Marin stepped forward before her. I would like to present my preliminary findings, she announced, causing a visible shift in the room. Seralis arched an eyebrow. Without the conclave's approval, I represent both myself and the field of xenoevolutionary science. Marin said, voice calm. And the data speaks for itself. On the projection behind her, images of Elendari cells interacting with human DNA flashed across the screen. Graphs of hormone changes, compatibility adaptations, and regenerative potential spun slowly in the air. The Elendari genome, she said, clearly contains latent sequences designed not only for planetary adaptation, but cross-species synthesis. Murmurs filled the room. Based on initial interaction with Terran biology, I submit that our species are not incompatible. We were perhaps meant to connect. Cyrilla stepped forward. That is a dangerous assertion. It's an inevitable one, Marin said. You call my presence here a prank, but I call it a proof of concept. Kale stood in silent support beside her. Marin let the data hang in the air. And if this is true, then what comes next is not fear, but opportunity. The silence that followed was heavy, the first tremor of something far larger. When Kale looked at Seralis, the counselor's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were burning. Aboard the Aegis Crown, time now passed with the weight of consequence. After Marin's public revelation, the diplomatic atmosphere had shifted from uneasy civility to barely concealed volatility. Whispers echoed through the ship's corridors. Terran officers exchanging glances, Elendari delegates, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Kale Thorne paced the central strategy chamber. Every sensor in the room jammed, every audio trace scrubbed. Only a skeleton crew had access to this meeting. Marin stood beside Dr. Voss, her posture regal despite the tension. Solon, Donovan, and Lieutenant Reese were present too, and the news was now undeniable. She's pregnant, Dr. Voss said simply. Roughly 6 weeks by Terran measurement, and her vitals are holding steady, no signs of systemic stress. Donovan whistled low. A baby. A real one. Human and Elendari. I hope the diplomatic manuals have a chapter for that. Solon's voice was tight. What's the risk if this gets out too soon? Marin answered. The conclave would recall me immediately. At best, they'd isolate me in a controlled lab for observation. At worst, they'd label this as genetic contamination and declare the pregnancy an aberration. Kale's fist clenched. They'd force a termination? It has happened before, Marin said quietly. Not for this reason, but we are a society that fears biological unpredictability. Cal looked at Dr. Voss. Can we hide it? For now, she nodded. I've begun fabricating alternate logs. The prenatal data is coded as an adrenal response variation, but it won't hold forever. Once the child begins forming secondary structures, it'll be harder to mask. Cal turned to the group. Then we use the time we have. We stay ahead of the narrative. Reese, quiet until now, looked up from his datapad. Sir, I intercepted a burst transmission routed through a reflective relay off the Elendari ship. It was encrypted, but directional targeting suggests it was aimed at the Conclave's bioethics board. Cale's expression darkened. They know. Or they suspect strongly enough to prepare a response, Reese said. Donovan grunted. We need a plan B, in case they come for her. Solon added. We might also need to consider extraction options, either off-ship or off-world. No, Marin said, raising her voice slightly. I will not flee. I'm not a fugitive. I'm not ashamed of what's happening to me. This child represents more than fear. Cal looked at her then, not as a marshal, not even as a diplomat, as a man staring at the line where duty, truth, and something far deeper intersected. Then we protect you, he said simply, and we make them see what this child really is. Meanwhile, aboard the Elendari vessel, Sapphire Thread Counselor Soralis stood before the hololith table in her private quarters. Dozens of biosignature graphs rotated in quiet display, data harvested from Marin's quarters before their monitoring access had been severed. The readings had been conclusive. Pregnancy, cross-species, viable. Her junior aide Vera stood nervously nearby. Are we going to act, she asked. We already have, Soralis replied. The Conclave has convened. They will demand Marin's return within 72 hours under the pretense of psychological reevaluation. If the Terrans refuse, they will invoke breach of protocol sanctions. Vera hesitated, and the child, unacceptable, Soralis said coldly. It undermines our very identity. The Elendari were not meant to dilute. We are the stewards of order, not participants in entropy. She waved her hand and dismissed the hololiths. We end this before it begins. The Aegis Crown's diplomatic hall now stood arranged for an emergency council meeting. Kyle faced the Elendari delegates, flanked by Marin and Admiral Saren, the Concord's civilian liaison who had arrived via encrypted transport just hours prior. Counselor Soralis stood at the center of her delegation, voice icily precise. We demand the immediate return of Marin of the Selenari to Elender Prime. Her conduct has deviated from the outlined parameters of her mission. Admiral Saren frowned. She's here by choice as a cultural envoy. Her psychological state must be evaluated, Soralis insisted, and her exposure to Terran biofields may have induced instability. Cal stepped forward, voice controlled. Are you accusing her of unfitness? I am stating a concern for her well-being, Soralis replied, and for the integrity of our alliance. Marin's voice rang out clearly. You fear I have changed? That drew a ripple from the assembled diplomats. Yes, Soralis replied without apology, and not merely physically. You speak differently, think differently, you laugh more, you express sentimentality. Marin raised her chin. Is that such a threat to us? Yes, Soralis said bluntly. Admiral Saren interjected. You brought her here as a farce. You didn't expect her to see humanity as anything but inferior. But she adapted. Now you want to punish her for doing what she was born to do. This is not your concern, Admiral Soralis snapped. She is Elendari. She's also pregnant, Cal said. Gas rippled through the chamber. Even Marin blinked in shock. He hadn't warned her he would reveal it. Soralis paled, her composure cracking. You lie. Cal nodded to Voss, who stepped forward and projected encrypted biometric scans. We have confirmation. Her body is adapting not only to accommodate human DNA, but has conceived a viable hybrid fetus, the first of its kind. You have doomed her, Soralis whispered. You've made her a weapon. Marin stepped forward. No, counselor. You did. When you used me as a pawn. Silence. A silence born of seismic change. Admiral Saren folded her arms. We intend to present this data to the Interstellar Council at the upcoming Unity Forum. The implications are too large to hide. If Elendar wishes to be a part of the future, now is the time to choose. Soralis turned slowly to Marin. You are lost to us. No, Marin replied. I'm more Elendari than I've ever been. Because I dared to evolve. Later that night, Kale sat alone on the observation deck watching the swirl of gas clouds beyond the ship's shields. The galaxy had grown sharper, heavier. Marin approached quietly and sat beside him, her hands resting on her abdomen. "You didn't warn me. I didn't want to keep hiding." She nodded. "I'm not angry, just scared, and proud." He looked at her. "Do you regret it?" "No," she said softly. "Do you?" Kale reached for her hand. "Never." They sat in silence, two shadows between stars, as the ship charted a course toward the Unity form, toward the unknown. The Aegis Crown approached Unity Spire Station like a silver blade cutting through velvet. Orbiting the neutral moon of Serev 1, the station was more than just a monument of diplomacy. It was the stage upon which alliances were made broken or reshaped. Within the central docking ring, security protocols tightened as every major species prepared to present their cases to the Interstellar Council. Scientists, politicians, ambassadors, and military officials moved through corridors of pearl-white alloy and luminous floor panels with wary professionalism. For Kale Thorne, it felt like preparing for war, but with words instead of weapons. Final checks are complete. Captain Solon reported from the station's guest suite aboard the Concorde level. Dr. Voss and Lieutenant Reese have secured all research data. Marin's medical readings are encrypted in 4 layers. Only authorized decrypts at the forum will expose them. Kale glanced toward the far window where Marin stood beneath cascading daylight filters, her form silhouetted against the artificial sunrise. She wore a sleek gown of midnight and silver traditional Elendari motifs embroidered at the hem. Yet her bearing, her posture, those were entirely her own. "She's ready?" he asked. "She thinks she is," Solon replied. "But she's scared." "We all are." Kale gave a tight nod. "Keep security tight. If anything feels wrong, you pull the team out." Solon hesitated. "You don't think they'll try something public, do you not, if they still believe they can control the message?" Kale said. "But once that illusion breaks, chaos," Solon finished. "Got it." In the Unity Forum chamber, a vast hall lit by ambient starlight and flanked by towering banners of every major civilization, the audience murmured in anticipation. On the dais stood 3 figures: Dr. Aleavos Liaison, Marin of the Selenari, and Commander Kale Thorne. Behind them, a projection flickered to life, revealing rotating DNA sequences, Elendari cellular maps, and overlays of human reproductive compatibility. It was a scientific display, but also a political bomb. Dr. Voss addressed the assembly first. "Over the past month, we have documented an unprecedented biological event. A member of the Elendari High Conclave, sent as a cultural envoy, has undergone verified measurable cellular reconfiguration as a result of prolonged proximity and genetic exposure to a Terran partner. The resulting conception represents the first recorded hybrid gestation between our species." The chamber erupted into shocked voices, some startled, some skeptical. A few, especially among the smaller envoy groups, were visibly intrigued. One voice cut through it all: "Lies." Counselor Seralis, flanked by her aides, stepped forward. "This data is manipulated. The Elendari genome is sacrosanct. Our biology is not subject to Terran entropy." Kyle stepped up. "You're not denying the pregnancy." Seralis's mouth twisted. "We deny its validity." Marin's voice rang clear. "You deny it because you fear it, because it proves you wrong." Eyes turned to her. "This child is not a threat," she said, voice rising. "She is a bridge, proof that we were not meant to be isolated, that our adaptability is more than survival, it's connection." She paused, then stepped forward, eyes scanning the chamber. "We were taught to avoid contamination, to maintain control. But I say, what is control without growth? What is purity if it means stagnation? I carry within me the future of 2 peoples, born not from conquest or command, but choice." The chamber fell utterly silent. Then a tall 4-eyed delegate from the Davari collective stood. "We have studied Elendari cell structures. The protein sequences described align with rare adaptive complexes in our own species. We request collaboration." A moment later, a blue-skinned emissary from the Aquari Depthborn stood. "Our scientists wish to examine the environmental triggers for interspecies viability." Now others rose one by one, voices offering support interest alliance. Cashel watched Seralis's composure crack like glass under pressure. The carefully controlled narrative had shattered, and in its place stood possibility. Seralis hissed something in her native tongue, then turned and exited without another word. Later that evening, back aboard the Aegis Crown, Marin stood before the viewport watching the curve of Unity Spire shrink in the distance. "We did it," Kale said behind her. Marin shook her head gently. "No, they did it. They listened. They chose wonder over fear. That's what amazes me." He joined her, slipping a hand around her waist. "And you stood there and told the truth. They needed to hear that." She leaned against him, silent for a moment. "Do you think she'll try something else, Seralis?" he asked. "Possibly. But now the truth isn't ours alone. It's out there. Public. Protected by interest and scrutiny. She'll hate that." "Good," he said. "Let her." There was a knock. Lieutenant Reese entered, eyes wide. "You should see this." He activated a holopad. The screen displayed a live news stream from the Concord's Central Comm network. A message scrolled across: "The Elendari Conclave has issued a statement of concern over cultural and biological boundaries, but has not formally denied the hybrid conception. A scientific summit is being proposed by 5 allied species, with Marin and Dr. Voss named as provisional co-chairs of an interspecies genetics initiative." Kale exhaled. "It's happening." Marin placed a hand on her belly. "She's already changing the stars." But not all news was good. That same night in the ship's engineering deck, Donovan discovered a hidden relay node tucked into one of the ventilation maintenance panels. He pried it out, called Kale immediately. "Someone planted a failsafe," he growled. "Encrypted transmission system, not ours. Not standard Elendari either, could be a splinter cell." Kale frowned. "Send the logs to Reese. Trace it." An hour later, Reese delivered the result. The transmission had been routed through a third-party relay and encoded in Verdari diplomatic cipher. Kale's expression darkened. "Saboteurs," Marin said quietly. "Or zealots." Donovan snapped his gloves off. "Whoever they are, they didn't expect us to find it so fast." Kale nodded. "Then let's make them regret it." 4 days after the Unity Summit, the Aegis Crown was en route back to Terran space, traveling along a charted corridor, monitored by neutral beacons. The mood aboard had shifted, no longer tense with secrecy, but electric with anticipation. Yet beneath the triumph of Marin's historic speech, unease had begun to stir. Kale stood in the operations briefing room, reviewing security reports. Across the table, Lieutenant Reese displayed the decrypted metadata recovered from the stealth transmitter found in the engineering deck. "It's not just surveillance," Reese said. "Whoever planted it had access to internal navigation systems and environmental regulators. With a few adjustments, they could have overridden life support or engine protocols." Cal leaned in. "Which means it wasn't a simple listening device." "No, sir," Reese replied. "This was a kill switch. Targets unknown. But if I had to guess, Marin, or the fetus." Kale's jaw tightened. "How many people aboard knew our trajectory and had access to our environmental data systems?" "Just senior command staff, Voss's medical team, and Donovan's engineers. And the Elendari delegation. They were denied direct systems access post-summit, but someone found a back door," Kale finished grimly. That night, Marin sat in the quiet of her quarters, lights dimmed, breath steady. Her skin shimmered more faintly these days, another sign of internal change. Her hand rested over the gentle rise of her belly. She had thought often about the child, not in abstract theory, not as an experiment, but as a person. Would she carry Elendari bioluminescence? Her father's earth-toned eyes, would she see the stars as possibility or as distance? Her musings were interrupted by a soft knock. "Come in," she said gently. Dr. Voss entered, face pale but composed. "We have a complication," Marin straightened. "Medical, numbered, tactical." Voss handed her a datapad. "One of the Elendari aides, Vera, disappeared from her suite 5 hours ago. Her biometrics are offline. No trace on ship-wide logs. She's gone." Marin frowned. "No, she's still aboard, but hiding." Marin scanned the data. She was Seralis' shadow, quiet, observant, never fully trusted. Voss nodded. "We think she may have been the one who planted the relay." "Do you believe she's dangerous?" Voss hesitated. "Enough that we've quietly reassigned your quarters. You'll be moving to the diplomatic corps, near Kale." Marin arched a brow. "Does he know he's the one who insisted?" Elsewhere, Kale met with Donovan in one of the retrofitted utility bays. The engineer stood beside a narrow capsule barely the size of a coffin with a sleek shielded frame. "What is that?" Kale asked. "A reinforced evac pod," Donovan said. "Silent drive, redundant nav, and enough shield plating to hide from a destroyer's scanners." Kale frowned. "You think we'll need to run, I think. If things go sideways, Marin and the baby need a way out," Donovan said. "And I don't like the gaps in our current surveillance coverage. Someone's still spoofing the internal trackers." Kyle looked at the pod. "Make sure it's ready." Donovan nodded. "Already done. Now all we need is time." The next evening, the storm broke. It began with a power fluctuation, barely a flicker, but Cal, seated in the command bridge, saw the pattern. Every camera on Deck 4 blinked twice, then fed a static loop. He stood immediately. Red protocol. Silent lockdown. No alarms. Internal tracking sweep focus on Deck 4. Solon responded instantly. Confirmed. Biosignature detected in maintenance crawl space 4B. Vera Cal growled. "She's going for Marin." He didn't wait. He ran. Marin sat alone, unaware in the reading chamber just outside the diplomatic suite. Her fingers traced a worn book cover, collected human tales of bridge when the lights flickered again. She stood. The soft hiss of a vent opening came from behind. She turned slowly. And there she was, Vera Elendari. Eyes wide, breath shallow, holding a sleek black injector in one trembling hand. "Hello, Marin." Marin didn't move. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be carrying that," Vera hissed, gesturing toward her belly. Marin stepped between the girl and the exit. "This isn't what you want. This isn't what any of us wanted." Vera's voice cracked. "You were supposed to make them look foolish, not breed with them." Marin's voice stayed calm. "Why does that frighten you? Because we've spent centuries holding ourselves apart. Safe. Pure. You let them inside you." Marin took a slow breath. "I chose to. No one forced me. Just like you're choosing right now whether to step forward or back." Vera's fingers trembled. Then came the voice behind her. "Drop it." "Kyle's!" Vera spun and saw Cale Thorne framed in the doorway sidearm, raised face like stone. Her hand tightened on the injector. Cale didn't flinch. "I won't ask again." Marin slowly raised her own hand. "Vera, please. If there's anything left of the girl I knew, don't make this your legacy." Vera's shoulders sagged. She dropped the injector. Security swept in moments later. 2 hours later, Vera sat in confinement silent. The injector was found to contain an engineered compound, one that would have quietly terminated a developing fetus without harming the mother. Cal stood outside the holding cell watching through the glass. Marin joined him, robe drawn close. "She was barely more than a child," she said softly. "She was a fanatic," Cale said. "Raised to fear change. Fed a story of superiority. That kind of poison takes root early. She still had a choice, and she made the wrong one." They stood there side by side for a long moment. Finally, Cale said, "Tomorrow we arrive at Solport Station. The Interstellar Council wants to continue hearings. Seralis is demanding your recall again." "I won't go," Marin said. "I won't let them take you," Cale replied. "But it might get worse before it gets better." She looked up at him. "Then we hold the line together." He smiled faintly, always. 3 days later, Solport Station. The diplomatic heart of the quadrant, Solport was a marvel of transparent domes and radiating towers built atop an ancient asteroid. Its corridors bustled with representatives from over 30 species, and its massive arboretum served as neutral ground for critical negotiations. But today, the council chamber stood quieter than usual, heavy with the knowledge that what unfolded here could reshape interstellar law. At the center, Dias Commander Kyle Thorne and Liaison Marin of the Selenari stood side by side as they had many times now. But today was different, because today they were not just representatives. They were parents. Dr. Voss stood nearby, a sealed data core in her hands. Within it was irrefutable evidence, cellular data, fetal growth logs, protein compatibility charts, psychological assessments. The undeniable proof of something once thought impossible. Councillor Seralis, flanked by a smaller Elendari delegation than before, approached the dais. Her voice was low measured. "The Elendari Conclave hereby invokes Clause 12 of the Interspecies Accord, requesting the immediate return of Liaison Marin to her homeworld for examination and reintegration." Admiral Saren rose from the Terran side. The Conclave's clause only applies to diplomats compromised by hostile influence. There is no evidence of coercion. Soralis's eyes flicked to Kyle. You would call a Terran pregnancy anything but coercion. Kyle didn't flinch. What she carries was conceived willingly. Marin stepped forward. Her voice carried clearly across the chamber. And it is not an affliction. It is life. I volunteered for this mission. I chose the research. I chose him. And I choose this child. Soralis stared at her, unreadable. You've chosen exile. Marin smiled faintly. Then let it be exile worth remembering. At that moment, Dr. Voss inserted the core into the chamber's central console. A projection flared to life, displaying a holographic simulation of the hybrid fetus, its unique organ structure, its cellular shifts, its growing heartbeat. The room fell into stunned silence. A Dovari delegate leaned forward. Extraordinary. An Equari scholar murmured, It has neural patterning from both species. Dr. Voss spoke. Ladies and gentlemen of the Council, what you see before you is the future of cooperative evolution. The child is stable, healthy, and adapting. A Thalari geneticist raised a trembling hand. You have scanned for emergent instability. Voss nodded, repeatedly. The hybrid cell lines show no signs of degradation. In fact, they show resistance to both human and Elandari viral markers. Soralis stepped back, lips drawn tight. Admiral Saren took her place at the front. We propose the creation of a joint genetic alliance initiative led by Dr. Voss and Liaison Marin, with oversight from a multi-species ethics board. A Zoran diplomat stood slowly. I second. A ripple of approval echoed around the chamber. Kyle took Marin's hand. It was done. Later that evening, they sat in the quiet of Solport's starlight garden. The synthetic sky had been dimmed to twilight, casting shadows across the petal glass path and bioluminescent flora. I thought it would be harder, Marin said softly. Kyle glanced over. It was. We just got better at hiding how scared we were. She smiled at that. Even Soralis didn't protest after the vote. She saw the tide turn, and the best diplomats know when to sink gracefully. Marin let her hand rest on her abdomen, now visibly rounded. Do you ever think about names? Kale blinked. Names for her, the child. He paused, then leaned back on the bench. Well, I had a few thoughts. She turned amused. Do tell. I thought maybe something that blends both our worlds, yours and mine. A name that means something more than just legacy or tradition. I've been thinking too, Marin whispered. There's a Selenari word, Alariath. It means light that crosses darkness, Kale considered. Alariath Thorn. No, she said, placing his hand over her belly. Alariath Valenthorn. Both names, both worlds. He smiled slowly. Alariath it is. 6 months later, aboard the Solstice Unity, the first Concord Elandari joint research vessel, Alariath Valenthorn, was born. She emerged with a quiet, curious cry, her skin a soft shade of dawn green, her hair a pale silver blonde, and her eyes constantly shifting color, just like her mother's. Kyle held her like something sacred, his large hands clumsy around her fragile weight. Marin watched exhausted and radiant as Alariath blinked up at the stars beyond the viewport. She has your resolve, Kale murmured. And your stubbornness, Marin teased. Dr. Voss stood nearby, logging data with silent awe. Her vitals are excellent, higher resilience markers than predicted, and her synaptic response rate is, frankly, unprecedented. Donovan peeked in from the corridor, grin wide. You two just made history. Marin didn't take her eyes off her daughter. No, she did. Epilogue. 5 years later, Alarith sprinted down the glowing halls of the Unity Forum's youth wing, laughing as she went. Behind her, a delegation of nervous aides tried to keep up. She's in the Arboretum again, shouted one of the attendants. Someone grab her before she starts reprogramming the weather pods. Kale and Marin stood near a balcony watching the chaos below, with weary amusement. She's fast, Kale noted. She's curious, Marin corrected. It's not her fault if your engineers keep forgetting to lock the override panels. Kale shook his head. Diplomats from 3 systems just watched her resequence a plant genome and then repaint the wall with her breakfast. Marin smirked. They should be grateful. That wall needed color. Down below, Alariath paused and looked up at her parents, then waved with both hands. Her smile could light stars. And as they watched her, this living proof of impossible hope, Cal and Marin knew that what had started as a cruel joke had birthed something vast and real. Not just a child, not just a union, but a future. Some legacies are written in treaties and blood. Others are written in lullabies and footsteps on polished metal, in laughter that echoes through the stars, and in the name of a little girl who proved that two worlds could become one.